I used to tell people my father was dead, even when he wasn't. It was easier than explaining the truth. Easier than admitting he walked out when I was 11 and never looked back. No goodbye. No explanation. Just an empty chair at the dinner table, and the sound of my mother crying behind a closed door. For years, I held on to that rage like armor. Birthdays, graduations, job interviews, he missed them all. I told myself I didn't care. That I didn't need him. That he was just a chapter I'd torn out of my life. But everything changed the day I got the call. "Mr. Carter passed away last night," the nurse said gently. "He asked for you, right before, before the end." I remember going cold. My hands shook, but I couldn't tell if it was shock or bitterness. I hadn't heard his name in years. Not from anyone who knew him. Not from anyone who knew me. I didn't go to the funeral. Not out of spite, but because I truly didn't think I belonged there. How do you grieve someone who already felt dead to you? Someone who chose distance over love. A week later, a small envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Just my name, written in a familiar, unsteady hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and my father's final letter. I stared at it for hours before I read it. Part of me was afraid of what he'd say, or worse, what he wouldn't. I'd spent most of my adult life building a wall against him. What if that letter cracked it wide open? The paper felt soft from age, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times before it ever reached me. The ink bled slightly where the pen must have trembled. His handwriting was still familiar, tight, slanted to the left. But I couldn't bring myself to read past the first line. "Chris, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. But there's something you need to know." I folded it back up and stuffed it in the drawer. That drawer. The one we all have, where we shove the things we don't want to deal with, broken chargers, old photos, unopened wounds. Days passed. Then weeks. The envelope remained untouched. Until one night, everything fell apart. I was cleaning out the hall closet when I knocked over an old box from college. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in years, me, maybe 10 or 11, sitting on my dad's shoulders at the lake. We both looked happy. It didn't feel real. Was that moment fake? Was I wrong to hate him so completely? I pulled out the letter again. This time, I read it all the way through. And what I found inside changed everything. I must have read that letter 5 times the night I finally opened it. Each word felt like a needle, threading through old wounds I thought had long healed. But they hadn't. They'd just been covered, buried under years of bitterness, assumptions, and silence. "Chris, I never meant to disappear. But there are things I wasn't allowed to tell you, things I still don't know how to explain." That sentence wouldn't leave my head. Wasn't allowed? What did that mean? Who could possibly have stopped him from being my father? The next morning, I pulled out the letter again, this time with a highlighter and a notepad. Call it curiosity, or maybe desperation, but I needed answers. Not closure. Not yet. Just truth. My father mentioned a few dates, vague references to meetings, and one line that stood out like a flare in the dark: "Ask Helen if she remembers the night I came back. She'll understand." Helen, my mother. We hadn't talked about my dad in over 15 years. She never said much, only that he walked away, and that we were better off. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She raised me, worked 2 jobs, and made sure I never felt the absence too deeply. Or maybe I just forced myself not to. That evening, I called her. She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Chris. Everything okay?" I found a letter. From Dad." Silence. Then she exhaled so long and slow I could hear the weight of decades in it. "I was hoping you never would." That sentence hit harder than I expected. It didn't sound like fear or guilt, it sounded like exhaustion. As if she'd been holding something in for far too long. We agreed to meet the next morning. She lived across town in a small apartment she'd moved into after selling the house. I hadn't visited in months. When I walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the woman who'd always carried me was finally tired of carrying herself. We sat down at her kitchen table, the letter between us. "I need to know the truth," I said. She nodded. And then, for the first time, she told me what really happened. It wasn't just that my father left, it was that they fought. Not over money or betrayal, but over something much deeper. Something unspoken. There was someone else involved, she admitted, but not in the way you think. She didn't say much after that. Just that it was complicated, and she didn't want me growing up torn between 2 versions of the same man. "So I chose the simpler one," she said, "even if it meant you'd hate him." But she wouldn't explain more. And now I was left with 2 half-truths, trying to stitch them into one reality that made any kind of sense. What was he hiding? Why wouldn't she talk? And why did it feel like both of them were protecting me from something I didn't even know existed? Later that night, I went digging through the box again. Old report cards, childhood drawings, birthday cards, and then something I hadn't seen before. A faded business card, taped to the back of a photo. Dr. Richard Langford, clinical psychologist. The same name my father mentioned in his letter. Just once. No context. That was the breadcrumb. And I was ready to follow it. I didn't sleep that night. Dr. Richard Langford. That name from my father's letter, it echoed like a distant bell I couldn't unhear. I ran an online search, expecting a dead end. But to my surprise, he still had a listed practice. Not in our city anymore, but just 2 hours north. I stared at the screen for a long time before dialing the number. Langford Psychology, a receptionist answered. I hesitated. Is Dr. Langford still practicing? Yes, part-time. May I ask who's calling? I gave her my name. There was a pause on the other end. Hold, please. Click. When the line came back, it was a different voice. Older, deeper. Chris Carter. I froze. Yes, I said. Did you know my father? I did, he said quietly. And I've been expecting your call for a long time. We agreed to meet the next day. When I arrived at Dr. Langford's office, I was greeted not by a medical building, but a quiet, ivy-covered house with a rusted sign out front. His assistant, a kind-eyed woman, led me into a sunlit room that smelled faintly of books and dust. Dr. Langford looked to be in his 70s, with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had heard every kind of confession. I don't know what you know, he began, but your father loved you. Desperately. That's why he left. I blinked. That makes no sense. It will, he said. But I need you to listen without interrupting. He told me that 22 years ago, my father came to him not as a patient, but in fear. Apparently, my dad had witnessed something. Something that involved his job at the city courthouse, a sealed document, a name that wasn't supposed to be seen. Dr. Langford never knew the full details. But he knew enough to understand one thing: if your father stayed, he said, you would have been in danger. Danger? From who? He wouldn't say. Or maybe he didn't know. But one thing was clear: my father's disappearance wasn't a betrayal. It was protection. I advised him to leave, Dr. Langford said, even though it broke him. I sat there stunned. My entire identity had been built on the belief that my father abandoned us. That he ran. But the truth? He was hiding, for us. And still, there were pieces that didn't fit. If he was protecting us, why didn't my mother say anything? Why hide it from me even after he died? Before I left, Dr. Langford handed me something. A small audio recorder. I don't know if it still works, he said. But he left a message on it. For you. He asked me to wait until you came looking. Back home, I locked myself in my room and stared at the recorder. It was old, scratched. I pressed play. Static. Then a voice, low, uncertain. Chris. I hope someday you'll hear this. I couldn't tell you why I left. Not then. But there were people who didn't want the truth to come out. And I couldn't risk you or your mother getting hurt. They said they'd come after you. That if I stayed, you'd never be safe. So I made a choice. One I never stopped regretting. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. You'll find answers. And when you do, forgive me if you can. I sat in the dark for a long time. The voice of the man I'd hated for 2 decades had cracked something inside me wide open. But now, I had more questions than ever. Who were they? What truth had he uncovered? And why was everyone else still protecting it? I couldn't sleep after hearing his voice. That recording kept echoing in my head like a haunting refrain. They said they'd come after you. Who were they? The next morning, I returned to my mother's apartment, the recorder clenched in my jacket pocket. I wasn't here for comfort, I needed answers. Real ones. She opened the door slowly, as if she already knew I was coming. I heard it, I said before she could even speak. Her face went pale. Chris, no more half-truths, I snapped. No more cryptic comments. You knew everything he said on that tape. You were part of the lie. Her hand trembled as she gestured for me to come in. We sat at the same table where we'd talked days ago. This time, there was no hesitation in my voice. Tell me. Now. She looked at me with eyes that seemed older than they were, tired from decades of carrying secrets she never asked for. Your father wasn't just a clerk at the courthouse, she began. He was a data analyst in the evidence division. He flagged irregularities in sealed case files, cover-ups, corruption, things that could ruin powerful men. Like who? Judges. Prosecutors. Even a senator, she whispered. When he went to his supervisor, they told him to stay quiet. But he didn't. I leaned forward, my stomach twisting. He gathered proof. Documents. Audio. He planned to go public. Then one night, a man showed up at our door. Said if your father didn't back off, we'd suffer. That's when he disappeared. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, voice cracking. Because I was terrified, Chris. They watched us. I had to pretend he abandoned us, to protect you. I thought it would pass, but it never did. I sat back in my chair, my pulse hammering in my chest. This wasn't just about a broken family. This was something much darker. Where's the evidence? I asked. Her lips pressed together. I don't know. But something flickered in her eyes. She did know. Before I could push further, there was a sharp knock at the door. We both froze. Another knock. Louder. Then a voice, deep and unfamiliar, Mrs. Carter. We need to ask you some questions. She grabbed my arm. Don't answer. Go out the back. Who is it? I whispered. She didn't say. Through the peephole, I saw two men. Suits. No badges. No ID. I slipped out the back entrance as quietly as I could and ducked into the alley. My heart was thudding so hard I thought it might give me away. From the end of the alley, I watched as the men stepped inside her apartment. I had no idea who they were. But I knew exactly why they were there. That night, I slept in my car. I couldn't risk going home, not without knowing who else might be watching. I kept thinking about the evidence my dad had hidden. If it still existed, it could destroy lives. Powerful ones. But that also meant, someone out there was still willing to protect those secrets. At any cost. I reached out to the only person I thought might help, Dr. Langford. He agreed to meet again, this time off the record, in a local park just after sunset. When I arrived, he was already seated on a bench near the lake, coat collar up, hands folded. I heard about the visit to your mother, he said quietly. They knew I was digging, I replied. I need to find the files. He hesitated, then slid a key across the bench between us. Your father left this with me in case things ever went this far. It's for a safety deposit box in Hillside Bank. My chest tightened. He trusted you that much? Langford nodded. He said if you were anything like him, someday you'd come looking for the truth. The key weighed heavy in my hand, small, cold, but more powerful than anything I'd ever held. According to Dr. Langford, the deposit box it unlocked contained everything my father had been trying to protect. Everything he'd sacrificed his life for. And now, it was in my hands. The next morning, I drove to Hillside Bank, a small, private place tucked between antique shops and cafes. A woman at the front desk asked for my ID and led me into a vault room. Each box had a number. Mine, 1397. As she left me alone, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the lock. Was I really ready for this? I inserted the key and twisted. Inside was a single manila folder and a small flash drive. That's it. No stacks of money. No dramatic confessions. Just two objects, quiet, plain, unassuming. Back in my car, I opened the folder first. At first glance, it seemed like typical legal paperwork. But then I saw names. Dates. Redacted case files. And one signature that chilled me to my core, Senator Douglas Harland. He wasn't just anyone. He was now the front-runner for the next presidential election. I flipped through page after page: bribery, suppression of evidence, intimidation of witnesses. This was a roadmap of corruption. And my father had found it all. And then I saw a photo paper clipped to the back page. A black and white still taken from what looked like a security camera. Two men shaking hands in a dark hallway. One of them was my father. The other was Dr. Langford. My heart stopped. What was he doing there? The timestamp showed it was dated just 2 weeks before my father disappeared. I stared at the flash drive in my hand, fingers trembling. At home, I plugged it into my laptop. A folder popped up: confidential. Inside were 3 video files. I clicked the first one. It was grainy footage of my father pacing in an office, clearly stressed. Langford said he'd protect the files, he muttered. But I don't trust him anymore. He's in too deep. If something happens to me, Chris needs to know. He can't trust anyone. I slammed the laptop shut. My blood ran cold. Langford hadn't just known my father, he'd been involved. Possibly even compromised. And now I'd handed him my name, my location, and let him know I had the key. I'd trusted him. And I'd just made myself the biggest target of all. I grabbed the flash drive and folder and bolted. My first thought was to go to the media, but who could I trust? Some of the people named in the files were still in power. I couldn't go to the police. I couldn't go to the courts. And then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: "We need to talk. Now." I wasn't lying, but there's more you don't know. Meet me at 8 p.m. Where your father used to take you fishing. Come alone. Langford. I stared at the message, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Was this a setup? A trap? Or was this my last chance to understand the truth before someone silenced it forever? I sat in my car at the old fishing spot, just a cracked wooden pier over a shallow, weedy lake. A place where my father once taught me how to cast a line, where silence wasn't awkward, and trust was natural. Now, it felt like a crime scene waiting to happen. I clutched the folder tightly in one hand, the flash drive in the other, and kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. The wind howled, rustling tall grass like whispers. At exactly 8 p.m., headlights appeared through the trees. Dr. Langford stepped out, wearing a dark coat, his face lined with something deeper than age: guilt. "You came," he said softly, walking toward me with slow, cautious steps. I didn't move. I watched the footage. He nodded like he expected that. "Then you know I failed him." "Your father failed?" I scoffed. "You were with him the night he disappeared." Langford looked down. "He gave me the files to protect. But I didn't realize how deep it all went until it was too late." "Senator Harland?" I asked. "And more," he said, his voice grave. "But Harland was the kingpin. Your father's disappearance wasn't just about politics, it was about leverage. He was going to testify, go public. But someone got to him first." "You let him die," I whispered. Langford's jaw tightened. "They gave me a choice: hand over the drive or lose my license, my life. I made the coward's choice. But I never stopped watching over you. When your name hit one of their internal watch lists last week, I knew they were closing in again. You knew I was in danger and still kept all this from me. I thought I could protect you by burying it, he said, voice trembling. I was wrong. But it's not too late to finish what he started. I wanted to scream at him, hit him, run. But the truth was, I needed him. He was the only person who had ever been close to my father's final days. I held out the flash drive. This is everything. No, he said. There's one more piece. He reached into his coat and handed me a second flash drive. Encrypted. It contains full video confessions from 3 insiders. One of them is Harland himself. My breath caught. Why would he confess? Insurance. Your father tricked him. Set up a trust exchange that was secretly a recording. Harland thought he was covering his tracks, he was actually sealing his fate. I stared at the second drive like it was radioactive. Take it to the press. Not local. International. Someone big. The files and the video together, they're untouchable. A sudden sound cracked through the night, a gunshot. Langford collapsed beside me with a strangled gasp, clutching his side. I dropped to my knees. Langford. He gripped my shirt. Run, Chris. Another shot rang out, hitting the ground near my feet. I ducked behind the car and grabbed both drives from where they'd fallen. From the tree lean, I saw movement. 2 figures, one with a silencer, sweeping the area. I ran. Not toward the road, but down the bank, across the mud and toward the boathouse. The memories of fishing here with my dad guided my steps through the dark. I broke in through the back door and slipped into the crawlspace under the deck, heart hammering, clutching the drives like lifelines. Footsteps passed overhead. Voices. Then silence. When they were gone, I crawled out, covered in dirt and fear, but alive. By morning, I was on a bus to D.C. Under a fake name. Carrying 2 drives that could shift the balance of power in the country. Langford was gone. But he'd redeemed himself in the end. And me? I was no longer the angry son with questions. I was the only person who knew the whole truth. And now I had the chance to tell the world. I arrived in Washington, D.C., exhausted but determined. I barely slept. My mind was racing, not just from fear, but from the weight of the choice ahead of me. What would I do with these files? Blow the whole thing open and risk everything? Or stay silent and go back to my life, knowing my father died trying to stop something far bigger than him? But silence is what killed him. And I wasn't going to make the same mistake. With help from a journalist friend I met in college, I secured a meeting with the Guardian. They took one look at the contents of the flash drives and immediately knew, this was history. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with them in secret. Verifying everything. Cross-referencing names, dates, surveillance clips, and even the final voice recording of my father, who unknowingly passed down the greatest act of bravery he'd ever done, to me. The video evidence of Senator Harland alone would have made headlines. But the real bombshell? The cover-up had spanned 4 administrations. My father hadn't just uncovered a few bribes, he had unearthed the blueprint of political manipulation, violence, and erasure. When the story broke, it didn't just ripple, it detonated. Harland was forced to suspend his campaign. Several high-level officials were indicted. Investigations were opened across 3 federal agencies. The country stood still for a moment, absorbing a truth too big to deny. And I, Christopher Carter, son of a man I once called a ghost, was the one who brought it to light. Langford's name was cleared posthumously. Turns out, he'd tried to come clean years ago, but was silenced and blackmailed. His sacrifice in the end wasn't just redemption, it was proof that people can change. That even broken men can find the courage to do the right thing when it matters most. I visited my father's grave for the first time in years. For once, I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. I knelt down, placed a copy of the newspaper with the headline, "Whistleblower's Son Exposes National Conspiracy," and whispered, "You were right. I just wish I'd listened sooner." For years, I carried bitterness in my heart. I thought he abandoned me, chose his work over me. But I see now, he was protecting me. Love doesn't always look like hugs and bedtime stories. Sometimes, love looks like silence and sacrifice.